Well, we've got a macabre tale to start the show tonight. A real story about a real person. A real and famous person. At least here in Tennessee.
Now, Russell Bean was the first baby of European descent to be born in the state of Tennessee in 1769, shortly after his parents settled here. His grave is in the Uriel Cemetery, with a headstone placed by his ancestors just a couple of decades ago, over the site where he was buried in 1829.
He is not buried with his wife or children.
Former wife. She divorced him. Now, in the 1700s, divorce was a rare thing, requiring good cause.
She had good cause.
Russell Bean was known for many things. Expert weapons maker, master gunsmith, first son of Tennessee.
Husband or father of the year, he was not. This fact attested by Joseph Crouch. He served as magistrate in Jonesborough in 1796 after he was appointed by John Sevier. The story arises from the documented court case of 1802, which holds the graphic details of this account.
Now, in 1799, Russell Bean, who was a gunsmith and who ran a gun manufacturing shop out of his home, he had spent 2 years selling his weaponry all along the Mississippi River, all the way down to New Orleans. And rather than returning home after the trading, which was customary, Bean engaged in games. He recounts participating in foot races, horse races, cockfighting, and other games of his time. Now, when he'd had his good time, he finally decided to head back home by way of the Natchez Trace.
It's important to say that during this time, if a tradesman was absent in the great wilderness for more than 6 months or so without word, worry about his safety would set in. If the absence lasted a year, most assumed that the person had met their fate. A woman with children to raise would often remarry quickly in such a case, or at least begin looking.
Well, now, more than 2 full years after Russell Bean left his family in Jonesborough, he returned. But when he did, he found his wife had given up hope of his return and had a new infant. Enraged, Bean took into a drunken furor, cut off the baby's ears, which was something customarily done to livestock. Now, when asked why he would do such a thing in court, Bean said he wanted to mark it so I could tell it from my own. Bean then sought the man who was the father of the child, and not finding him, he began to brutally assault the brother of the man in front of the courthouse, nearly beating him to death. Bean then began waving a loaded pistol and a bowie knife and cursing all who came near him. And a warrant was issued for his arrest, but Bean ran to his home and armed himself with the many weapons and ammunitions that he had there. Sheriff Crouch could not assemble a posse to bring him to court. Everyone was afraid to approach him. Fiery Andrew Jackson was the judge in Jonesborough at this time, and he challenged Sheriff Crouch.
Summon every man in the courthouse to be bringing in dead or alive.
Well, this did not settle so well with Crouch, whose men had already been threatened.
Then I summon your honor first.
Well, Jackson called a recess of the court and grabbed a loaded pistol.
By the eternal, I'll bring him.
The sheriff then brought Judge Jackson to Bean's home, where Jackson was reported to say,
Surrender, you infernal villain, this very instant, or I'll blow you right through.
At that point, Bean surrendered, and he was taken to court. Bean would later explain that he could see that Jackson had the look of a man ready to kill. I think it was fitting that he had the chance to experience that very look from the other end. When Bean was finally brought in to face charges for maiming the baby, he was branded on his hand. And what he did next, well, I can't even say it.
Still burning with anger during his trial, Bean proceeded to bite off the branded piece of flesh and spat it out on the floor before the crowd. Bean later went to jail, escaped, and returned home. The judge and sheriff allowed him to remain sequestered in his own home rather than spill any innocent blood.
Bean was given a heavy fine. His wife, who had thought him already dead, was allowed to divorce him. After these incidents, no one questioned her decision.
Now, Bean's grave is in the old Uriel Cemetery, just a short horse ride from this very spot. And this story is found in the 1802 documents from the case.
Now that's a chilling story. Relatives of the Crouch family and the Bean family still live in the area. This is only one of the many stories about their difficult and challenging lives out here in what was then known as the Western Frontier.
We've got so many stories in our historical archives, many touching on the supernatural. So coming up next is Angie Fellers-Mason from the Heritage Alliance with a special Halloween segment of
Ask the Historian!
Thanks, Rochelle. Archives collect all sorts of things: letters, wills, deeds, recipes, ghost stories. This ghost story comes from the Archives of Appalachia, located at ETSU. The archives has several ghost tales available for research, many of which can be found in the Joseph Sargent Hall collection. Beginning in the 1930s, Hall recorded stories, remedies, and songs from individuals who still lived or were displaced by the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. In the early 1990s, his collection was donated to the archives. The following tale was told to Hall by Mrs. Wesley Metcalf at her home near Del Rio, Tennessee on June 30th, 1956. She said she learned the tale from J.N. Click, a resident of the same area in 1916 or 1917. Here now is "Oh Lord, Where Will I Put It?" a ghost tale by Mrs. Wesley Metcalf. There's a place called Westmar where it's kind of a whistle stop, or used to be, for the trains. You could flag the train down if you wanted to go to Newport or any place, and just a few houses stood over there. There was one pretty good-sized house. It had, I guess, 6 or 8 rooms. An old man by the name of Will Range lived in it, and the report had been for years that the house was haunted. So one night it was kind of cold and wet, and a couple of acquaintances of mine had been in Newport and got off the train at Westmar, and they had a long walk across the mountain to get home. So they decided they'd stay overnight with Mr. Range and go home the next day. They'd forgotten about the stories of the haunted room in this house. So when they went in, Mr. Range gave them their supper, and they soon asked to be shown to bed. They was very tired. And Mr. Range gave them this room that was supposed to be haunted. So Mr. Click told me this story. He said they got in bed. Pretty soon the friend that he had with him fell asleep. Mr. Click said he was feeling kind of drowsy and said, all at once, it seemed that the door of the room opened, and he could hear footsteps round through the room, just like someone walking over the floor. And they was moaning. Every once in a while it'd say, "Oh, where am I gonna put it? Where will I put it?" And he said it scared him. He didn't know what to think about it. So he used his elbow and Mr. Turner's ribs and got him awake. He said, "Listen, Buddy, do you hear what I hear?" Well, Buddy raised up on the bed and listened a few minutes, and this thing was still walking around over the floor saying, "Oh Lord, where will I put it? Oh Lord, where will I put it?" So Mr. Turner, he cleared his throat and said, "Ahem, by gosh, put it where you got it." So Mr. Click said he just stood it as long as he could. He said just every once in a while it would make this noise, that moaning noise, and say that. So he called in Mr. Range and asked him if he had any other place he could sleep the rest of the night. Mr. Range said, all right, I forgot about that room being haunted. Said, just come in here and sleep in the room where the old lady and I are. There's an extra bed. So they spent the rest of the night in the room with Mr. Range.
Strange as it sounds, though, it does bring up a funny image. Grown men spending the night at the foot of the bed of the man and his wife, just like my kids used to do when they got scared after watching a scary movie.
Yes, and it's good to have a mom and dad to room with when you're scared. But when you go off to college and scary things happen, you don't have that option. I went to Virginia Intermont College. It's closed now, but I don't think one resident in particular minds too much. It closed in 2014. I liked going there because it was a historic college, but it was rumored to be haunted. The story I heard was about a former student named Vera. Vera had become involved with a professor, about 10 years older than she was. Vera found out that he was married only after she told him that they would be expecting a child at the end of the term. After that, the professor let her deal with the matter on her own. The poor girl hanged herself, and in doing so, she knocked over a lamp and started a fire. Witnesses say that although the building was fully restored, at times the room she then occupied appeared to revert back to its past charred state. It had been repainted many, many times, and each time the burned look bled through the paint.
What about haunted Rutherwood Mansion of Kingsport? This mansion was built in 1818 by the Reverend Frederick A. Ross, and it sits overlooking the Holston River. Most people say that Kingsport was built upon the founding of Rutherwood Manor. It is said to be the home of the Lady in White. The ghostly figure is the Reverend's own daughter, Rowena. Rowena was to be married, but her love, on his way to see her, had a terrible accident and drowned in the Holston River, and his lifeless body went drifting past the manor. Rowena was heartbroken at the news, and last in the night walked out of Rutherwood Manor and into the Holston on which it overlooked. Since she could not join her true love in life, she decided to join him in death. Her figure can be seen late at night, making her way down to the river where she ended her mortal life, only to remain stuck forever there, between worlds, loving out her last faithful one.
Another ghost who is said to walk here is Joshua Phipps, the second owner of the house, known in life to be a cruel man. His evil laugh has been reported to ring throughout the mansion. Descendants of his servants have given accounts that were handed down, not only of his cruelty in life, but of the fear he struck in everyone even after his death.
Lori, one thing I've noticed is that even though we are located here in these beautiful mountains, many of our ghost stories revolve around the water.
I've noticed that too, Rochelle. We've got the ghost of the Nolichucky, the Lady in White, and up next we've got the story of Cadet Cox, buried at Rocky Hill Cemetery, who joined the Navy and was drowned at sea.
Ahoy! Ahoy there! Do you know what it is to go sailing? To have the breeze in your hair, salt in your nose, to see nothing but blue for miles and miles? You know what it is to be alone, completely alone in the stillness, and have everything you know and everything you need. The water is my home, not dry land, and that's why I left. Born and raised in Jonesborough, Tennessee, the son of a dreamer who'd gone out west to seek his fortune in the gold rush of 1849. My father settled in Jonesborough to become a merchant, to marry, to make a family. I was born to a life on land, in a town with nothing larger than a creek. I was born to a mother and father with all the promise in the world, but prospects change. My mother died when I was 3. My father followed when I was 10. All my siblings. And I was left alone to drift on the dry land. You took me in, Uncle John, and I will be forever grateful for that, but I did not want your life. Everyone in town knows John D. Cox. Fortune smiled on him in '49, and it smiles on him now. One of the most successful merchants in town, a businessman, an entrepreneur, upwardly mobile, and everyone knows me too. Poor Will Cox, who lost his mother and his father. Poor Will Cox, adrift on dry land. You did not want your life, Uncle. You did not want your roots with no water, so I left. I turned to the sea, and I enlisted in the United States Naval Academy. A man's got to have prospects. You and Father taught me that. 2 of you chased a dream all the way to the West Coast. The dream of gold. But my gold cannot be found in hard rock. My gold is the glint of the sunshine as it plays across the water. The sensation of rocking wood beneath my feet as my vessel climbs over the waves. The feeling of sturdy, hard rope in my hands as I pull and it cuts into my flesh. The sound of voices shouting around me, ordering commands.
Carry on.
Hoist every bit of canvas.
Secure
The yards,
mooring line.
carry on and sail. The winds are right. Tie the ship to the pier.
We're being bamboozled.
The approaching vessel is not flying the correct ensign or flag.
Steady, midshipman.
A midshipman, a naval officer in training, and that's what I am. The water will be my home. And when I'm out here in the spray and the salt, I'm no longer poor Will Cox, and I'm at peace. Adrift on dry land and adrift at sea are 2 different things, but I don't expect you to understand. Here I'm at peace with my lot. Here I feel closer to Mama and Papa and the siblings, even though they're all gone. This blue expanse reaching out to the sun, this is my freedom. A blank canvas, a chance to start over. This is where I choose to stay.
April 14th, 1875. Mr. John B. Cox, with profound sorrow I inform you that Cadet Midshipman W.H. Cox was drowned this morning by the upsetting of the shell of his boat club. C.R.P. Rogers, Rear Admiral Superintendent.
I was buried in dry land at the top of Rocky Hill in Jonesborough. I was buried near Mama and Papa and the siblings. The Naval Academy supplied a headstone, the blank canvas, and you picked the design, Uncle. An overturned boat, a paddle, and 2 hands reaching out of the water, reaching for sunlight, reaching for air, reaching for life. It reads, "Thus he perished, Cadet William H. Cox, Midshipman, U.S. Naval Academy, Annapolis, Maryland, born October 25, 1855. Accidentally drowned near Annapolis, April 14, 1875. Son of James C. and Sophia E. Cox. Thus he perished. Poor Will Cox. Everyone who sees my tombstone will know the sea took my life, but they won't know the whole truth, that it also gave life to me."
Cadet Cox's story is a tragic one. He has one of the most photographed and visited tombstones in historic Jonesborough Cemetery. Unusual in that It does have an overturned boat, an oar, and hands reaching up, forever telling his sad tale to anyone who passes by.
Now, Lori, you mentioned the Witch of the Nolichucky, and I really don't think I've ever heard that story.
Oh, Rochelle, you are in for a treat then. We told this story for the first time a couple of years ago, and we were requested to tell it again tonight. And this year, it's our own sweet, wonderful stage manager, Phyllis, playing the eerie, scary Witch of the Nolichucky.
There are some places around here that really are haunted. And I know of one for sure. Do you know about the Witch of the Nolichucky River? This is a story that's been told since it happened in 1888. There was a rolling store that came through, one of them traveling salesmen that sold liniments and other things like overalls and perfume. He'd come by here and we bought a few things and sent him down to the next farm over. Where he left there, it was getting late. The farmer invited the salesman to spend the night, but he wanted to go further on his way. The farmer told the man about a cave near the Nolichucky. Along the way, about 4 hours later, a bit before midnight, here comes driving up the path to the farmer's house, the rolling wagon, and the horse with a wild look in his eyes. The farmer took off on horseback toward the direction he'd sent the salesman. The moon was bright and he could see ahead along the banks the figure of a man lying on the ground. Farmer got off his horse and went to the man who just lay there with his eyes staring blankly into the night sky. We all had heard about the witch out there that drove men mad, but never believed in her until now. And as he reached down to the salesman, he heard a sweet voice.
You'll be all right. Turn around and talk to me. I haven't had any company in a long time.
Well, no, I won't.
Now, the farmer knew from the stories that what drove men mad was to look the witch in the eyes, so he tells her,
I just want to help you.
Then she spoke even sweeter.
Sit here a while and talk with me, please.
And he felt cold, bony fingers touch his shoulder. He froze, determined not to turn around.
I won't look.
Just then a breeze caught to the trees and the moon glowed into his face. He turned to look at the moon, and what he did, there was her face. He thought for one moment to look away, but it was the last sane thought that he ever had. 2 days later, a traveler found the two men laying down on the ground, eyes fixed on the sky, with all the sense drained out of them. They never, ever came out of it.
Wow, that was super scary. I'm almost afraid I even asked about the Witch of the Nolichucky.
You know, Rochelle, after that, I think we all could use a moment to catch our breath. So, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Yarn Exchange Radio Show on WETS 89.5 FM out of Johnson City, Tennessee.